Welcome to episode 70 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by true crime FBI cases. We get to speak to retired agent Mike Leyden, who served 26 years with the FBI. Leyden, who has a law degree from Villanova University, was assigned to the Jacksonville Division, Pensacola Resident Agency, and the Detroit Division, where he worked bank robberies, kidnappings, and fugitive matters. Once transferred to the Philadelphia Division, Leyden helped set up and was the supervisor of the Special Operations Group, SOG, which was based on a concept initially established in the Detroit Division. He was later appointed as the supervisor of the Newtown Square Resident Agency. To avoid an unwanted transfer to FBI headquarters, Leyden stepped down from his supervisory position and was placed on the organized crime squad to work cases targeting the Philly mob. In this episode, Leyden reviews for us an extortion case that resulted in the conviction of Philly mob boss Nicodemo Scarfo Sr., Philadelphia City Councilman Leland Beloff, and Beloff's administrative assistant, Rego, for attempting to extort $1 million from Willard Rouse, a Philadelphia developer. During the investigation, two made men, Caramandi and Thomas DelGiorno, became government witnesses, and their testimony eventually led to the indictment and conviction of the entire hierarchy of the Scarfo family. After retirement, Mike Leyden became the vice president of corporate security and surveillance for Caesars Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City. Currently, he still occasionally accepts private investigative assignments. I was almost relieved to get this interview with Mike Leyden because the Philadelphia Division is known for the great work they've done in disrupting the Philadelphia LCN. But I hadn't had the opportunity to interview any Philadelphia agents about the Philly mob until now. Mike does an excellent job laying out the case that put little Nicky Scarfo behind bars. Before we get to the interview, I just want to say thank you for all of the listeners who have sent me well wishes regarding my daughter's wedding. I posted a few photos on my Facebook page, Jerry Williams Author, and on Twitter at JerryWilliams1. You'll find them in the feed, or you can just wait until the July newsletter comes out, and I promise to include a nice family photo and a few other images from the wedding. It was fabulous. And my daughter, she was absolutely stunning. I was told that I didn't look too bad either. Fun was had by all, and now that the fantasy dream wedding is over, I am so thrilled to get back to my real life, writing novels and interviewing retired agents for this podcast. I'm back. Of course, over the last 2 weeks, things have gotten even crazier. And although I started this podcast because I wanted to improve the way the FBI was portrayed in books, TV, and movies, I must tell you once again, I am so pleased that people can see through all of the negative and derogatory and sensational coverage of FBI leadership and know that in this podcast, they'll be introduced to the real FBI, and that's the FBI agents and employees who work the more than 200 violations of federal law for which the FBI is responsible. Hey people, don't believe the hype. I can tell that while I was away, you had the opportunity to go back and pick up on some of the episodes that you had missed earlier. Thank you for doing that. My Amazon sales figures also note that you picked up a few copies of Pay to Play. Thank you for doing that. My time and expenses for producing and hosting FBI Retired Case File Review are supported by you. When you pick up a copy of Pay to Play for yourself or as a gift for someone you know loves crime fiction, you're helping to defray the cost of me producing ad-free a weekly podcast episode. So thank you. And thank you for the emails, posts, and tweets. Keep them coming. I really do love hearing from you. Now here's the show. I want to introduce my guest, Mike Leyden. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Jerry. How are you?
I am doing good. I am really excited to talk to you about this case because there's two things that the Philadelphia FBI Division does well, and that's go after the Philly mob and public corruption. This is like a great opportunity because this case has both.
Has everything, yeah.
So how did it all start?
This case started, from my perspective, when I was transferred to the Organized Crime Squad in Philadelphia, Squad 1, in January of 1986. When I arrived there, the supervisor was a guy by the name of Klaus Rohr. There were two agents on the squad named Bob Brown and Andy Sloan. They had been operating an informant by the name of John Pastorella. Mr. Pastorella had been arrested trying to smuggle a large quantity of heroin into the United States and was now cooperating with the government. He was originally from the Scranton, Pennsylvania area, and he had some knowledge of the characters, the organized crime characters in Philadelphia, and he was a contractor by trade. And back in those days, there were tremendous tax benefits to rehab historic buildings, especially in the old city section of Philadelphia. So what Andy and Bob did was set Mr. Pastorella up as a contractor, doing some rehab work in that area, knowing that full well that it'd just be a matter of time before some of the organized crime types would try to wheedle their way in to get some of his money. And they started the operation probably in the fall of 1985. So I came on board in January of 86, and we were meeting almost daily with John, and he was wearing a recorder when he would meet with these different characters. Well, along came a guy by the name of Nicholas Caramandi, also known as the Crow. He, at that time, was a made member of the Scarfo crime family, LCN family. He sensed that John could make money, and he latched on to John and became his, quote, mentor, which basically meant he was like a leech. He was trying to just get whatever John could get. So they were going along. The case was moving. We got into February, March. Things were happening of a minor nature, nothing really earth-shattering. But one day, Caramandi meets with Pastorella, and Pastorella's wearing the wire at the time, and he tells Pastorella that he has a relationship with a city councilman named Leland Beloff. Beloff was the city councilman in the first councilmanic district in Philadelphia, which covered the entire eastern half of the city of Philadelphia, from Delaware River to the Schuylkill River. That was his territory. And he told Pastorella that Mr. Beloff's administrative assistant was a guy by the name of Robert Rego, R-E-G-O. This can go off on a tangent, but he was related to a faction within the Scarfo family, not a made guy, just a associate of the Harry Riccobini faction, which had been feuding with Scarfo, but that's another whole story. But anyway, Rego was Beloff's administrative assistant. Those two characters had come to Caramandi and said that there was an opportunity to make some money because a developer who was trying to put together a huge riverfront development along Thames Landing by the name of Willard Rouse needed certain legislation passed by city council. Some of them were financial guarantees, that type of thing, to get the project off the ground. And Rego and Beloff felt this was a great opportunity to make some money. So they went to Mr. Caramandi, because he had the muscle of the mob to, pull this off. So he came to Pastorella asking his advice on how to do this and, what particular things he should ask for, that type of thing. So we in the Bureau knew that something was coming down, but we just didn't know what or when. And it went along, and Pastorella would talk to Caramandi, but Caramandi would not tell him everything. He would just tell him enough to serve Caramandi's purposes, not to, tell him everything. But all of a sudden, I guess it was in May, I go back to the office with Bob and Andy, and Klaus Rohr, the supervisor, says, we have a meeting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Willard Rouse is coming in to make a complaint. And we looked at each other and we said, oh, we know what this is going to be about. Obviously, they started to reach out to the Rouse people. So the next morning, Mr. Rouse and his project manager, a guy by the name of Pete Balaceris, and a couple of lawyers, I think, came in and they laid out this story where Balaceris, who was the project manager on Penn's Landing, had been approached by Bob Rego, who introduced him to this guy who looked like he was right out of Central Casting, a short guy, sunglasses, in a bar with sunglasses and a cigarette dangling out of his mouth. He was telling the Rouse representative, to get this Penn's Landing project off the ground, you're going to have to give us $1 million.
Wow.
And, yeah, so this, and it was really a great scene because after he laid out the story, I take out a picture from my folder. It's of Caramandi. I say to the project manager, this is the guy who came to you, right? And he said, how did you know that? They didn't realize that we had this other thing happening. But we knew it was going to happen. But we were very fortunate that Rouse was an honest and upright person who came forward.
Let me ask you a question. When you were hearing about this, when Caramandi was talking about it, did he say it was Rouse? Did he say it was the Penn's Landing, River project? Or did
he never told Pastorella the name at the time. He just said, he did say Penn's Landing, the developer, and he never used his name in the beginning. We knew who Rouse was, the developer. He had gotten the ticket to be the developer. So we knew he was going to be the victim of the shakedown. But we got very fortunate in that Rouse came forward himself with his project manager. So what we did was we arranged to wire up the project manager. He had an appointment with Rego that evening, and they met in a bar in Center City, Marabella's, I believe it was. No, a place across the street from Marabella's. It's gone now. I can't remember the name of it, on Broad and Locust. And at that point, Caramandi made the pitch on tape that we had that he wanted $1 million, or the project was not going to happen. So he said, at this point, the legislation that Rouse needed to keep this project moving was due the next day to be entered into City Council. You needed at least a month ahead of time because there was 3 readings of the bill at 3 separate council meetings. So that to get the thing done by the end of the year, the legislative year, it had to be done the next day. So we get a call, we go back, this is now 11 o'clock at night, and we say, well, we got to put an undercover in there, keep this project manager out of the way. So I used to be out in Newtown Square, and I worked a lot of great white-collar undercover cases with a superstar agent by the name of Jim Balls. I called Jim, and I said, Jim, you got to get your white-collar outfit on. We're going to do a thing. And he's such a bright guy. He picked it up immediately. So the next morning, he got wired up. He met with the project manager. The project manager took him to meet with Caramandi, and the project manager handed Jim off to Caramandi. Jim gave $5,000 of government money to Caramandi to get the ball rolling, and they made plans to meet later to get the rest of the money. As soon as Caramandi got the $5,000, our surveillance people were outside. He was followed back to City Hall, went right up to Beloff's office, and was seen meeting with Bob Rego, and then he left. About 2 hours later, the bills were introduced in the city council. So we had a pretty good cover on this.
Let me interrupt you.
Yeah,
let me interrupt you.
Sure.
Just ask another question, because we know that Philadelphia, unfortunately, does have public corruption. Most of the time, it's directly with the council person and whoever they're getting the money from. Why did they need to have the Philly mob involved?
Well, I think what really happened was Caramandi insinuated himself into that so that the Scarfo people would get their cut. In other words, he knew he was involved in it, and in order for them to get their cut, he stayed in the conspiracy. He didn't want them to just take it all for themselves, because that became an issue later. The split, who was going to get what out of the $1 million, if and when it ever came. So, getting back to the deal, the legislation was passed or introduced, and then they had 3 more weeks of readings and discussion on the bill. So we had time. In the meantime, we got an emergency Title III phone intercept on Beloff's office, and then there was a meeting scheduled from Jim Balls to meet Caramandi. This was the following week on a Wednesday, and Jim showed up. Caramandi did not show up. No call, no nothing. We found out later that Caramandi had to go to a making ceremony that day down in South Jersey. They were making some new members of the family, and he had to attend, so that's why he didn't show up. We didn't know that at the time. We were very confused because, it just didn't make any sense. But these guys, they were on their own schedule. So anyway, he contacted Balls later, and thinking Jimmy, of course, was a Rouse executive. And Jim, we brainstormed with Jim, and we said, we've got to show that he's in league with the city councilman, Beloff. So Jim contacts or meets Caramandi again and says, I got to make sure that the councilman's on board. He says, well, you're not meeting him. There's no way you're going to meet him. So Jim devised this thing. Well, how about if we go into a public place and you have your guy there, Beloff, and have them give me a signal. And they agreed that he would show up at Marabello's bar that afternoon, and he would make a signal, fist clenched across his chest like a Roman salute. Because that would be my signal to you, that his signal to you that he's in on the deal. The Balls agreed to it, and sure enough, it happened. We couldn't get a camera inside because it was very dark in there, and it happened in a very fast manner. But Jim was able to testify later that Beloff made the signal to him. So this goes on again. They meet him again. Caramandi, of course, wants more money, and we're not going to give him any more money. And we had a couple of meetings. One meeting I'll never forget. Caramandi's starting to get suspicious now because no more money's coming. And they met in the lobby of the Hershey Hotel at Broad and Locust. And Caramandi starts writing notes to Jim. Jim's wired up and can hear him talking, but then there's no talking for a long period of time. Caramandi had written a note and showed it to Balls, talking about where's the money. And then Caramandi would set the note on fire. He did this about 3 times. And all of a sudden we hear this guy coming by. He says, get out of the way, get out of the way. He had set this plant behind him on fire because he had put a burning piece of paper into the plant. And they didn't even realize it happened. And the manager of the hotel comes running over. It was just unbelievable. But anyway, this goes on. These guys weren't this stupid. We would never arrested anybody. But he continued trying to get money out of Balls, and we weren't going to pay it. And so that final day, here's where it gets really interesting. We see Caramandi meeting with attorney Bob Simone. And later on, we find out Simone was in on the conspiracy. He was convicted of it later. But he meets with Bob Simone downtown, and then the two of them split up. And we found out later that Caramandi had really gotten suspicious. He wasn't going to show up. It was supposed to be the day the thing was going to get passed, he was going to get the rest of the money. Jim tried to convince him to do it in a white-collar way, like, let's, get a vendor. We can get the money out of the company that way. We can't just take $1 million out. But Caramandi wasn't going to go for that, so we couldn't set that up. So the next day, he was supposed to meet Caramandi, give him the money, and of course nobody showed up.
$1 million in cash?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's how unrealistic Caramandi was. That's the way the guy was. He wasn't very sophisticated. So nothing happened. But, of course, what did happen, the councilman pulled the bill that day. And we had the phones on his office, and Mayor Good called, talked to Bobby Rego, and he said, "What are you doing here?" The mayor had no idea what was going on. "Why did you pull it?" And he says, "Oh, we can't talk about it, Mayor. That's it." And I'll never forget this line Bobby Rego told the mayor. He says, "Mayor, kings come and go, but barons stay forever." I'll never forget that line.
I don't even know what that means.
Well, what he means is you could be the mayor, but we're going to be here forever. We're running the show.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
We're just lowly barons. You're the king, but we're the barons, and we're going to be here after you're long gone. So, you're going to have to deal with us.
The thing about this project is it's been for years, and still nothing has happened down at Penn's Landing.
I know.
So I can imagine that the Mayor Good was really excited that finally something was going to happen down there.
Yeah, this was going to be a crowning achievement for him. And, he was still smarting from the MOVE debacle,
Right.
And, so, yeah, he was really hot to trot, but it just didn't happen. So, in the meantime, as an aside to this, while we were wiring Pastorella against Caramandi let Pastorella in on a side extortion that Caramandi and Beloff were working on. There was a developer in Old City named Harry DeVoe. He owned a large apartment house down around 2nd and Arch. I forget the name of it. He needed some legislation from Beloff's office, and he was told through Caramandi, and he took Pastorella in on it so he could give him some advice. Beloff had a girlfriend whose name I can't recall, and he wanted to get her an apartment downtown, rent-free, which is what this developer did in exchange. That was the quid pro quo for him getting his legislation passed through City Council. So that we had the whole case of that on tape as well. And then thirdly, the wiretap on Beloff's phones revealed, also through Pastorella, both the tap and Pastorella, we knew that there was a third developer, a guy named John Bennett. John Bennett was a really interesting guy. He was a doctor, a radiologist, but he started developing, historical buildings in Old City, and he found out he was making more money doing that than practicing medicine, so he gave up medicine and became a full-time developer. He was trying to get an ordinance passed with regard to one of his rehab properties, and he needed legislation. He gave Beloff $25,000 in cash to get this bill passed. And I'll never forget the conversation between Bennett and I guess it was Rego the day the bill passed. He said, "I'm down here with my friends, the other developers who were partners on it. These dopes think this is what's really happening. They don't know what I had to do to get this thing passed." I mean, it was just beautiful, just beautiful. So we had three basic counts against Beloff: the girlfriend's apartment, the doctor's development, and the Penn's Landing. So what we did was we arrested them about a day later. We arrested Caramandi, Beloff, and Rego, and arraigned them. Now, we still had Pastorella wearing a wire against Caramandi. So now that he's under indictment, we can't wear a wire against him without his lawyer knowing it or somebody, knowing about it. So we dismissed the indictments against the three of them so we could continue over the summer to listen to what Pastorella and Caramandi had cooked up. And then later in October of that year, we re-indicted them. And
Mike, can I ask why they were indicted at that time anyway? If you knew you wanted to continue, what was the decision to indict at that time and then?
We didn't indict. We just got complaints and warrants. We didn't use the grand jury.
Okay, and then you had the time frame after the complaint. You have a matter of time before you
have 90 days to either indict or dismissed. So we dismissed them, and they thought they were home free, and it really didn't help the case that much, but we did it just so we could continue to monitor Pastorella and Caramandi with the wire. In October, we indicted. Now, this is where things really get interesting. Caramandi is put in the detention center in Philadelphia. In the detention center with him is a guy by the name of Raymond Morturano, also known as Long John Morturano, another made member of the Scarfo family. He was being held in there because he had been convicted of the murder of the roofing union boss, John McCullough. And he was in there awaiting, I don't know whether he had been convicted and there was on their appeal or whether he hadn't been on trial yet, but he was up there. And Caramandi bumps into him while he's in there, and he's nervous because he knows what a hair-trigger temper that Mr. Scarfo has. He's scared to death something's going to happen to him, so he's talking to Raymond Morturano, asking for some reassurance. And this is where things really get diabolical. Morturano tells Caramandi, hey, buddy, they're going with Beloff and Rego. They're going to throw you to the wolves. This is for you. And he makes the sign of the gun with his thumb and index finger. So this just sets Caramandi off. He figures, I'm dead. That's what caused him to call us to start cooperating against Scarfo, because he was sure he was going to get murdered because he screwed up this big extortion that they were trying to pull off.
I was going to ask if you could give us a little historical background, because, I mean, that's what the Philadelphia Division did so well, is to get so many of these made people to cooperate. Is this one of the first people to turn?
This was done about 24 hours after Tom DelGiorno, a capo, who was actually Caramandi's capo. He had decided to cooperate with the Jersey State Police because they had tapes of him bad-mouthing Scarfo from a wiretap they had on his house at the shore, and he knew he was probably going to be dead. So it happened almost simultaneously for two different reasons. But let me tell you the backstory on Morturano. I've talked to Nick Caramandi since, and he thinks he was played by Morturano. Morturano's son was a huge drug dealer who had been arrested and charged in a huge conspiracy here in Philadelphia. And he had hired Bob Simone to represent him. And Bob Simone recommended to the son that he plead guilty and everything will be fine. You know, you'll do some time, but, you know, you can't beat this case. He pleads guilty, and the judge gives him life without parole.
Whoa.
It really. So Morturano had a deep-seated hatred for Scarfo and for Bob Simone. So Nick Caramandi believes that he was told a lie by Morturano just to get even with Scarfo because of what he considered to be a double cross with regard to his son. Does this get complicated enough for you?
Yeah, but I get it. So he knows if he tells this to Caramandi may turn on Scarfo, and so he uses him.
He used him. Yeah, he played him.
And guess what?
It worked. So now Nick Caramandi at 4 a.m. calls the FBI office. He's scared to death to do so, but he did it. And he got a hold of Jim Marr in the office. And that morning I come in around 8 o'clock, and Jim calls me over and he says, let's go. We got to go somewhere. And he wouldn't tell me what until we got in the car. He says, we're going up to the detention center to get Nick Caramandi. He wants to cooperate. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, no, he's doing it. So we get up there. I'll never forget this either. I must have signed 37 pieces of paper certifying everything is fine. I had total authority to do this. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. We just wanted to get him out of there, you know. God only knows. But it didn't come back to haunt me. So we get Nick and get him situated. He is like a nervous wreck. I mean, he is so upset. He thinks he's a dead man. And we had to take him before Judge Fulham, who was the trial judge in the Rouse extortion, so he could get new counsel. And that was another great scene. Nick Caramandi trying to talk to Judge Fulham. Judge Fulham's ready to jump out the window. Get this guy out of my office, you know. It was really funny. So anyway, he starts cooperating, and of course he gives us everything. Not only the Rouse extortion, but all the attempted murders and shakedowns, extortions, drug shakedowns, just everything what the family had been doing for the last 10 years. But then we have to go to trial. Now, of course, here are our defendants now, with Caramandi, and then DelGiorno was involved in the conspiracy also, because he was Caramandi's supervisor, his capo. He also knew about the Rouse extortion, was able to corroborate Caramandi. So as a result of their cooperation, we had already indicted Rego and Beloff, but now we had indicted Nicky Scarfo because he was in charge of running the whole operation as the boss.
Hey, Mike, can you tell us a little bit, because I have people listening, you know, from all over. Can you give us a little bit about Nicky Scarfo?
Yeah, Nicky Scarfo at the time was in his mid-50s. He was born in New York. His father was a made man, I think, in the Genovese family. They moved to Philadelphia, and he became a member of the old Angelo Bruno family at the time. He always had a hair-trigger temper, and he got in an argument over a booth at the Oregon Diner in South Philadelphia back in the early 60s. He stabbed and killed a guy over this argument. He was put in jail for, I think, 6 years for manslaughter and got out in 4. And was just a small-time made member doing whatever he could to make a buck, you know, for the Bruno family. But his temper was such a problem, he was banished. Angelo Bruno did not like any, you know, boat rocking at all. So he determined that he should be taken out of the city. So they sent him, this is in 1963 or 64, they sent him to Atlantic City. At that time, Atlantic City was a dying resort. Nothing was going on there. His ascension came after gambling became legal in Atlantic City in the late 70s. But anyway, he was banished down there. He became boss as a result of two things. The assassination of Angelo Bruno in 1980. His successor was a fellow by the name of Phil Testa. Now, Phil Testa, his nickname was the Chicken Man. And if you're a Springsteen fan, if you ever hear his song Atlantic City, his first line of the song is, "They blew up the Chicken Man in Philly last night." Well, that's talking about the assassination of Phil Testa. He was killed because there were other young Turks in the family that wanted him out of the way. And they devised a bomb. A bomb blew him off the porch of his house. It was set by remote control, and they put roofer nails in the bomb, trying to make it look like it was done by the roofers union. But it was actually an internal assassination done by some rival members. When he was killed, the New York people knew that there was some kind of a conspiracy, and they called a couple of guys up to New York, Philly guys, a guy named Antonio Caponegro and a Frank Sindone. They were behind the conspiracy initially to kill Bruno. They went up there thinking that Caponegro went up there thinking he was going to be made boss, but he ended up being killed. Both of them were killed. And the New York people knew Scarfo through his father. So I forget the name. Anyway, the real head of the Genovese family was at the time. They designated that Nicky Scarfo would be the boss, even though he was living in Atlantic City. So this was in 1981. So in 81-82, Scarfo became the boss. And then he started a whole reign of, he loved to kill people because he was so paranoid and so bloodthirsty. There must have been a half a dozen to 9 killings. I wasn't around then, but I was out in Newtown Square then. But there was a murder. It seemed like every week there was another, member getting whacked for whatever reason. So he was the boss, and that's where he came in. So with the testimony, we had those 4 guys indicted, or 3 of them, and also Charles Iannici, who was an associate of Nick Caramandi. He was involved also. what happened was Beloff's lawyer was a guy by the name of Oscar Goodman. Now, he's a famous mob lawyer from Las Vegas. He ended up, he eventually became the mayor of Las Vegas, if you can believe that. But,
oh, wow.
Yeah. He's a Philly guy originally. He grew up in Philadelphia. I think he went to Penn Law School. And he went out to Las Vegas maybe now 50, 60 years ago, and he with nothing, and he became he represented all the mob guys out there, Tony Spilotro. As a matter of fact, if you ever see the movie Casino, he played himself in the movie because he represented.
I've seen that many times.
Yeah, well, the guy playing Tony Spilotro's lawyer is actually his real lawyer, Oscar Goodman. He represented Beloff, and Bob Simone represented Scarfo, and Rego was represented by a guy named Josh Briskin. Nice guy. I didn't know much about him. I think he was a friend of Rego's. Rego and Beloff immediately made a motion to sever the case because they didn't want to be linked to a mob guy. And, of course, the judge granted it. The judge was John Fulham, who was chief judge at the time, an absolute brilliant guy, but a real hard guy. I don't know if you ever had any cases with him, but he would not book any nonsense, what he considered to be nonsense in his courtroom. I mean, I've seen him just totally embarrass lawyers because he didn't feel they were properly prepared, you know. It was just amazing. But anyway, he granted the severance. So the first trial began in April of 87. This was Beloff and Rego together. Lasted about 2 weeks. And I think a long story short, it was a hung jury. There were a couple of counts that they were both acquitted on, but we couldn't believe that they were hung. We found out later that the one juror that hung was a woman by her last name, I'll never forget, was Mangalusa. And even Beloff tried to telegraph it to the government lawyer at the time. When she was being voir dired for jury, he said, "Are you any relation to the famous jurist?" Now, it was her uncle, I think. He was long dead, but his nickname was Turn 'em Loose, Mongaloose, when he was on the bench.
Okay, that would be a clue that you don't want that person on your jury.
But the prosecutor missed it completely. She hung the jury, okay? So now everybody says,
Caramandi and the other mob
Caramandi and DelGiorno both testified. They did very well, I thought. But Caramandi, he didn't come off real good. They dressed him up like he was a hood. The next time, for the second trial, he dressed up like he was in college, and it worked better. But anyway, so now we're down and out. We had a hung jury on this. Now we have to do Scarfo, and we tried Scarfo. And because Bob Simone was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Rouse extortion, Fulham solved that problem by not permitting Bobby to cross-examine either DelGiorno or Caramandi because of the conflict, because he was supposedly part of the Rouse extortion. So he had another lawyer, Miles Feinstein from North Jersey, a nice guy. He would do the cross-examinations of those two witnesses. That trial started in April, lasted about 10 days, and Scarfo was convicted on all counts. They were only out about 5 hours, the jury, so we were feeling a lot better about that. About I guess in end of June, we started the retrial of Beloff and Rego, and this one went a lot better. We had a better jury, obviously. They were convicted on all counts. It took them maybe a day and a half to come back. But there were a lot of counts because we had testifying not only Caramandi and DelGiorno about the Rouse extortion. We had the developer, Harry DeVoe. He was given immunity, and he testified about the shakedown for the girlfriend's apartment. And also the other developer, John Bennett, was immunized, and he talked about giving a $25,000 bribe to Beloff and Rego for his legislation to be passed. So
did they testify? Did they testify in the first trial too?
Yes, they did. They did.
What about Rouse?
Rouse,
did he testify?
He never testified. No, his project manager Pete Ballesteros did, and he was a good
Now,
witness.
he was a very wealthy and well-known developer, right? He developed properties in New York and Chicago. And
he has a brother. He had a brother, I forget his first name, who was a more, I guess, a larger developer, but it was the same name as his. I think it was his brother.
Okay.
He was primarily, he did a lot of work in the Baltimore Harbor area and has done a lot of work up here in Philly. He died prematurely. He died of lung cancer about 12, 13 years ago of lung cancer. He was very young. He was like 63 or something. He was a gutsy guy to stand up to these politicians, and to these mob guys. But he became a hero as a result of it. And that case, in my opinion, I mean, I'll never be able to prove it conclusively, that was the straw that broke the mob's back, because that was their high water mark. They had gotten to the point where they figured they could shake down a guy like Bill Rouse, and get away with it. And that's what caused everything to go the other way. You got as a result of those two, Caramandi and DelGiorno cooperating, we put together, about a year later, we put together a huge Rego against the family, Scarfo, everybody, naming, there were like 138 predicate acts, murders, extortions, drug dealing, you name it. And the Rouse extortion, we threw that in there again, just for good measure. So, and down the road, I wanted to indict him with everybody else, but that was a stupid thing on my part. He would have gotten severed. Then we went down and we indicted Bob Simone as a result of him being involved in the Rouse extortion. What happened
with him?
Well, here's what happened with him. After the whole family was convicted, the day Phil Leonetti got sentenced, he got 40 years. He had called Jim Marr and said, I want to cooperate. So he became a cooperating witness. And make a real long story short, he gave us another incident where Bob Simone conspired with Leonetti and Scarfo and a loan shark by the name of Tony DeSalvo, who had been owed a lot of money by another developer, a guy by the name of Lenny Palullo, owed a lot of money to the loan shark, and he wasn't paying. They went to Scarfo's people to collect the money, and they did. And Bob Simone was right in the middle of that one. He even got a piece of the payment, and we were able to prove that against him, as well as his involvement in the Rouse extortion. He was counseling these guys all during the shakedown of Rouse on, what they could do, what they couldn't do. And it was just a great series of events. Everything fell into place. That was a tough case to make, though, because he had the patina of respectability as being a lawyer. And everybody loved him. All the other lawyers in Philly, they got somebody from the Department of Justice to prosecute him, because none of the lawyers, I think, on the strike force had their heart in it, because they all liked the guy.
Wow.
Crazy. So
he was found guilty and he got
he was convicted about a year and a half later. He was indicted on RICO and some of the predicate acts, like the Palullo collection of an illegal debt and the Rouse extortion and a couple of other involvements. And he was given a 4-year sentence. And he's dead. He died maybe 10 years ago. Everybody's dying, except me.
Yeah. You're still going strong. Well, that's
I hope
amazing.
So. That's it in a nutshell. I mean, there's so many side stories and, double crosses, triple crosses, and it was an amazing case. And like I told you earlier, it had, sex, the mob, political corruption, you name it. It had it all in one case. It was really neat. Oh, I got a great story to tell you. Let me tell you this story. This is a true story. It was in Oscar Goodman wrote a book. If you ever get his book, read it. It's tremendous. He talks about when he was in town representing Beloff. They went out to dinner at Bookbinders down at 2nd and down at 2nd and Chestnut, Front and Chestnut. And it was during the trial. And he said Beloff was so paranoid, he would see agents everywhere. And they were standing at the bar, and Beloff says to Oscar Goodman, he says, see those two guys over there in the suits? They're agents. I know they're goddamn agents. And he says, relax. He says, nah, God damn it. And he had a couple of drinks and he got a little drunk. He goes over and says, you goddamn FBI, leave me alone. The guy says, FBI, we're IBM. There were two guys having a drink at the bar, and Beloff almost, attacked them because he was sure they were agents watching. I had never heard the story till I read Goodman's book. He's got some stories. That guy, he's an amazing individual.
And that's the attorney.
Yeah, that's Oscar Goodman, the attorney, former mayor of Las Vegas.
Okay. The great thing about this case is that, of all the things that Scarfo and the Philly mob did as far as murders and really heinous crimes, they start this takedown, that their downfall starts because of a public corruption extortion case.
Right. And that coupled with Scarfo's reputation for being paranoid and impulsive, who would kill at the drop of a hat, I think that trait of Scarfo is what scared Caramandi and DelGiorno into taking up with the government. They figured they had a better chance of living with us than they did with Scarfo because of his reputation. That too, But the whole thing came to a head from this case. That's no doubt about it.
The other unfortunate thing about this case is, you have these wonderful waterfront developments in all of these big cities. And Philadelphia for 30, 40, 50 years has been trying to develop their waterfront and have not been able to. So one of the big unfortunate things about this case is that, the waterfront's still not developed. And
it's still not developed properly. You're right. And I don't think it ever will be now because it's too chopped up now. There have been little things here, little things there, but not an overall, thought through project.
Yeah. Well, I can't say that I would have wished that Rouse had given the $1 million because we all know that even if he had done that, something else would have happened and the development would have fallen through.
I want to tell you one quick story too. I just remembered. Bud Warner went to interview Jimmy Tyoon, who was a politician. He went to jail eventually down the road.
Yeah, I know Jimmy.
Yeah, well, Bud went to interview him about some aspect of the Rouse extortion. And at the end of the interview, Jimmy says, listen, will you please indict that guy Beloff? I want to run for his seat. And that's exactly what happened. He ran for Beloff's seat after he went to jail. Yeah. And then he goes to jail. Down the road a couple of years, right?
I remember that well. So, Mike, tell us a little bit more about you. You're everybody who worked organized crime in the Philly Division was such a colorful character, and you definitely were one of those people. Well, when did you join the FBI, and why did you join the FBI?
I was at Villanova Law School in 1967, and a rep came out and talked about how, you get a gun and a car and do anything you want pretty much, and, it'd be a lot of fun, and I was always enamored with the Bureau. And so I decided I'll take a shot, see if I can get in, and I got in. About it. I figured I'd stay a few years and then maybe come back and practice, but I just fell in love with it when I got in, and I stuck it out, and I'm glad I did,
Did you spend most of your time in the Philly Division?
No, well, I came in under Hoover, so he had a rule, you go to a first office for a year, and if you're from the Northeast, you go to the South. So I went to Jacksonville, Florida, was there 2 months, just hung my last picture in our apartment when I got transferred to the resident agency in Pensacola, which was 400 miles west, So we packed up and went out there, stayed there for about 8 or 9 months. And then my second office was Detroit. In 69, I got there. I left there in 76. I got my office of preference back to Philly, which is my home. I got back here in January of 76. I was on the surveillance squad, became the supervisor of that squad. Then I got the supervisory job out in Newtown Square. And then they called my number to go to Washington, and I stepped down. I didn't want to make that trip because my kids were in high school. And that's when I came to work organized crime in Philly. So that's basically it.
So when did you retire?
Yeah, I was just going to tell you that. I've been retired almost as long as I've been in. I retired in July of '93. I took a job head of security at Caesars in Atlantic City for about 3 years. I got bored with that, and I came back here and I hooked up with some retired agents and do some PI work just to get out of the house, you know. And that's where we are, you know.
Well,
I'm still going to work a couple of days a week, and I'm a doddering old man, but I'm still pushing, you know.
Well, you got some great stories, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry. I think you do a great job with this project, and I wish you all the best, and you should monetize it like I told you earlier.
Just buy my book. That certainly would help out a lot.
That would help.
Right, so
okay.
I want to give you the last word.
Just thank you for giving us old-timers the opportunity to, you know, talk about our old cases. You know, you can't talk to my family anymore. They shut me off, you know. So it's good to be able to do that. And you do a great service. It's of a historical nature, too, I think, because this stuff will last forever, you know, so it's great. And I want to wish you the best with the wedding, okay?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
And that's the end of the interview. As always, back at jerrywilliams.com, you'll find a photo of Mike Leyden, and you'll find links to several newspaper articles about the Leland Beloff and Nicky Scarfo extortion case. If you enjoyed the episode, I hope you share it with your friends, family, and associates. I make it easy for you. At the bottom of the episode show notes, you'll find all the social media share buttons. And if you're listening to this on your phone, you can, of course, share the episode directly from your device. Okay, so I have a fantastic crime fiction recommendation for you. I loved this book. When I picked it up, I had no idea it was going to be so good, but it seemed like an interesting premise, and it was. The book is The Good Girl by Mary Kubick, Kubick. It's about an abduction that goes horribly wrong. It's supposed to be a kidnapping for ransom, but the man that's hired to kidnap the daughter of a well-known judge decides instead to hide her in a secluded cabin in rural Minnesota instead of delivering her to his employers. The book's storyline follows the subsequent investigation to find her. What is so cool about this book is that it's told from multiple and alternating perspectives. The kidnapper, Colin Thatcher, the main character, Mia, her mother Eve, and the detective, Gabe Hoffman, who becomes emotionally attached to this case and to Mia's mother. The case is told in present tense and past tense. It is a page turner. I downloaded the ebook and I also got the audiobook and let the narrators read to me. Yes, I said narrators because for this audiobook, there are 4 different narrators reading the roles of the 4 different point of view characters. A pleasant and innovative surprise. If I sound enthusiastic, I really am. I love this book. Again, it's called The Good Girl by Mary Kubick. And while you're at Amazon picking up a copy of The Good Girl, please don't forget to check out my FBI thriller, Pay to Play, about a female FBI agent investigating corruption in the Philadelphia strip club industry. Accepting her new case assignment may be the worst decision Special Agent Carrie Wheeler has ever made. And don't forget to join the FBI Retired Case File Review reader team, where I will keep you up to date on the FBI in books, TV, and movies with my monthly newsletter. When you join my readers group, I will send you a copy of the FBI Reading Resource, which is a list of all of the books, fiction, nonfiction, and memoirs written exclusively by the retired agents I've interviewed on this podcast. To sign up to join my reader team, all you have to do is go to jerrywilliams.com and sign up when you see the pop-up. This episode was sponsored by FBIRetired.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. I want to thank you for listening and hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.